Jesus called us to do. We see this throughout the Gospels, but especially my favorite passage is in Luke chapter 9. And in verse 1 of Luke chapter 9, Jesus calls the 12, and he said, I'm going to give you a power and authority to heal the sick and to cast out demons, and then demonstrate my compassion for those who are hurting and have these physical needs, demonstrate that compassion, and demonstrate my power and authority and my divinity, who I am, that you can do such a thing.
I've lived stories that have proved your faithfulness.
My name is Rick Wood. I'm a biomed technician, and I serve with Worldwide Biomedical Charitable Services. And for those who don't know what biomedical services are, it's a occupation or a job that provides technical support to medical mission work. I actually started with Worldwide Biomed about 15 years ago, and it was I was working at a hospital managing a biomed department, and I had already done previous biomed mission work in medical missions in multiple countries. When God says, okay, it's time to go back to the mission field and do that full time. So with the seeking of God, he directed us to start our own 501c3 ministry called Worldwide Biomed. We get a lot of requests. I actually receive more requests to go to the field than I can actually handle because there's a shortage. The technical support needs in mission hospitals and around the world are so overwhelming and demanding, and the requests come in all the time, that it can be overwhelming and very frustrating, and sometimes you wonder, why are we even doing this? I actually had a boss at a ministry. I came back with a report, and he said to me, why do we even try? Because the needs are just overwhelming, and there's such little help. We know the reason why. The reason why is because that's what God uses to touch the lives of many people. He uses medical missions, he uses healing to bring people to himself and to demonstrate his love and compassion and his deity and his authority and power over disease and illness. You see immediate and quick changes in people's lives when there's healing brought. For example, with the cleft lip surgeries, these are people that are typically ostracized and sometimes even euthanized, babies that are not wanted because they have these deformities or orthopedic deformities where they can't walk, whatever. Even cataract surgery teams where those who can't see have their sight restored. You see an immediate response and change, not only physically when that healing is brought, but when the adults are given a mirror and they see themselves for the first time, they realize how big of an impact it's going to be. And so one of my favorites is a man who looks at himself for the first time in a mirror. And like me, he's overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed emotionally because he knows the change it's going to be in his life. There's another one of a lady, a gal, and she sees herself in a mirror, and she's just holding up her hands and praising God and thanking God for the change in her life and what it's going to mean to her. I've seen God has done a lot of things over the years, as he's given me the opportunities to go to so many different places, and like I said, providing technical support now in 40 different countries. I get to see a lot of things that most of the world doesn't see, the different cultures, what they struggle with, and how God is working in each of those countries and cultures to draw people through himself, through, again, medical missions or through healing. That's what Jesus did. So I'm often asked, how can you help? What can you do to be a part of the ministry and a partner with us? And there's multiple things, and quite frankly, the biggest thing, and you hear this and you think, oh, that's not that much, but it's a priority. and that's prayer. We always need prayer. Some of the places we go to or I go to are difficult, not only difficult in the overwhelming needs and so on, but there's travel challenges, safety issues, and so on. Could always use funds to help with the cost of trips and recruiting more people to make those trips. That's always appreciated. Also, there's always needs for medical equipment. I was just returned from Mali, and while I was there, I went to a remote village, and they showed me their delivery room, and it was very sad, but very common. But it's something that most people in this states can't imagine, delivering a baby.
I think what I was saying there, and I don't remember, there was not much after that, but it's difficult in some of those places. But we were able to provide, I know what, I was going to say they didn't even have a fetal Doppler at that little clinic. So for those of you ladies probably know what fetal Dopplers are. But so anyway, we were able to provide one of those for them. And I think that was close to the end of it. So I have good news and bad news. Good news is, there's only 8 slides, 6 slides, that's even better. The bad news is the 5th slide is just the title to a 40-minute video or 40-minute message or devotional. So, but I'll keep it short. Jeff will keep an eye on the time for me. So anyway, well, let me open with a word of prayer. We need to do that. There's no more videos to have glitches with. There's just the emotionals. As you can see me, I struggle with that. So we'll pray and ask God to glorify himself during this time. Father, we are thankful for this opportunity. Thank you for your grace, mercy, and love, and in what you're doing in the world and doing in our lives. We pray as I share and as we look at what you've been doing in the world, that we would be encouraged and challenged, and we would apply some of the things we're going to hear from your word this evening into our own lives. And so we commit the time to you for your glory in Christ's name. Amen. As you saw in that video introduction, when we started Worldwide Biomedical Charitable Services and got it incorporated and then got the 501c3, after the fact we realized that was not a very smart name for an organization. So, and everybody pointed it out. It was way too long. It was terrible name for marketing. So anyway, when we refer to ourselves anymore, we've shortened it to simply Worldwide Biomed. So that's the organization shortened, Worldwide Biomed. And we have, it's a small 501c3, and we have a small handful of donors and supporters that are our partners. But we have 2 big ones that I want to acknowledge. And the first one is, of course, hopefully you can read those, but is our family here at First Baptist. That partners with us, and so we're so thankful for the encouragement we receive from the church, the support and the prayers, and some of the, and I don't see all of them, but there's some of them that are real prayer support warriors that are so faithful in their prayers, and it's just amazing how faithful they are. And I just wanted to say thanks to all who support us in prayer, because it's definitely needed, and I see the results of those prayers on the field. And so I always would just like to say that what God's doing because of your prayers, he's crediting that to your account. So that's scriptural. You'll get that. You'll see the benefits of that. And when you get home in your bank account, God's crediting that to you. And so we're so thankful for that, because we need that desperately. And I mentioned the other partner that's kind of large there that I work with. And I mentioned it in that Samaritan's Purse and World Medical Mission. That's the WMM, World Medical Mission, the medical division of Samaritan's Purse. And I mentioned that because if you follow me on Facebook at all, or see any of the Facebook posts or pictures, a lot of times you'll see me in scrubs. I'm in surgery a lot, and it'll have Samaritan's Purse or World Medical Mission name on it. And so people, what's this Samaritan's Purse World Med? I make a lot of trips with them. I started 34 years ago full-time with them, and then, as I mentioned in that video, gone part-time with other ministries, and then back to full-time with Worldwide Biomed. But there's so many needs for technical support in medical missions that I get requests all the time. And a lot of them come from Samaritan's Purse because they're busy with mission hospitals and surgery teams and emergency hospitals and so on. And so they're all the time, hey, can you go? And so I think as an incentive to get me to say yes, they asked me to come back on part-time. So I'm actually a part-time employee of Samaritan's Purse and World Medical Mission. That way they hope I will say yes more often to their request. So that's the partnership with Worldwide Biomed. So what I'd like to do now is share what I've been doing this year, what's been happening, what's kind of tentatively planned to happen, kind of the schedule for the year. I do get so many requests, as I mentioned in that video and just mentioned now. I get so many requests because the needs are so great that, and I've already received them for next year. So I have to make tough choices in this way. We appreciate the prayer support. That's part of always my prayer request is pray for wisdom and direction for the board and for me, because we get more requests than we can do. So I have to make that tough decision to who to say yes to and who to say no. So this was the end of last year. This was what we anticipated doing this year in our trips. And I average about 8 trips a year. I've done more. Those are kind of difficult to do more than that. 8's about the most reasonable that I can kind of handle, and that both physically and being away from Jenny and all that, that's about 8 trips a year is about what I average and what I try to do. And so this was this year's schedule. I already started the year in February. I went to Jagoria Hospital in Kenya, and that was with a urology surgery team. And then in March, I went to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, with a cleft lip surgery team. And you'll see on this schedule, you're going to see DRC, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, 3 times. So out of the 8 trips, 3 of them are to the DRC. And then the next slide, which we're going to get to in a minute, I'm going to show you a map because some of you are wondering where some of these places are. And I'm going to talk more about why DRC and some of the aspects of the DRC, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. So anyway, that was in March. And then the end of April and the first part of May was the last trip I made to Bangalo Hospital in Gabon. And it was very interesting when people would either ask me or after I was gone, and they'd ask Jenny, where's Rick? And she'd say Gabon. I think without exception, people would look like deer in the headlights. And maybe some of you are like, Gabon? Where in the world is Gabon? Some people didn't even know what continent it was on. So I'm going to show you Gabon so you'll see where Gabon is. And so that was the first 3 trips I made. I was actually scheduled to be, this very time, I was supposed to be back in the DRC. And so if you're following the news, you've seen the news that they've been hit with the latest Ebola crisis is going on. And if you follow the news closely at all, you'll notice in DRC where we go is we operate out of a city called Bunia, and that's right where the epicenter, if you will, or the center of this Ebola crisis is going on. So wisely, they canceled that trip. So I'm not there, I'm here, or I would have been there today if it wouldn't have been for the Ebola crisis. They do, and if you follow the news, Samaritan's Purse actually has sent over a field hospital to deal with that, kind of contain the crisis. I had a bunch of dings all day today from a team member that was a nurse that was with us in Gabon. And it doesn't take much for me. She left today for the DRC to go help with the Ebola crisis. With Ebola, though, there's no medical equipment. You just try to contain that, care for those who have it, keep it contained, and you have to suit up with hazmats, which I've done before on COVID trips, but they don't have any medical equipment, so they don't need any biomed techs. So they don't ask me to go there, and that's okay. So, but there is a team there that's working with the Ebola. If you skip down 2, you'll see DRC again in August. That trip has already been canceled as well because of Ebola. So 2 trips out of the 8 have been canceled. The next one I'm scheduled for is Ghana. That's a new surgery center or hospital that's been built in Ghana. I've been helping that ministry for a couple of years, consulting on the construction, the layout of the hospital, helping obtain all the medical equipment resources for that hospital. With the support we've had from some of our donors at Worldwide Biomed, we've been able to even purchase some of the medical equipment for that hospital. So that was earlier, it was tentatively planned that I would be going there actually in June or July, but all that equipment has been staged in Indianapolis, at a ministry in Indianapolis. And so those have been delayed multiple times, and so they just shipped that yesterday. So that shipment to Ghana has just left Indianapolis, and it's about a month or so port to port, and then you got to clear customs and get it delivered to the hospital. So all that to say, that tentative date for going to Ghana to install all that equipment, teach the clinical staff and the technical staff and the admin how to take care and use that equipment, that trip is pending the arrival of that container. So we're looking probably July or August for that trip. Then September is back to kind of an annual trip to Cambodia, and that's with a cataract surgery team. You'll notice of these 8 trips, only one's not to Africa, and that's Cambodia, of course. And so that's for September, and so planning that. Then the last trip that's tentatively scheduled for the year is to Kapsawara Hospital, which is a hospital located in the northwest of Kenya, close to the Uganda border. And that's going to be for training. I plan to train some biomed technical staff. They're also their clinical and their admin, how to manage and take care of their medical equipment. So that training is tentatively scheduled, still working on logistics for the end of October. Now to the map. But you can't read much of that, can you? All right, well, I'm going to tell you where it is, where things are. So as I mentioned in the video, I've been doing this for 34 years and had the opportunity to travel 40 countries, to serve in 40 countries. And 14 of those countries are actually located in Africa. So 14 of the 40 have been trips to different countries in Africa. And so we'll start with the largest one that I guess you probably can't read it, but in the center, kind of the dark blue Central Africa, that's the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. And to give you an idea, there's 2 things that's I want to point out about this. One is it's the size and why that makes a difference. So if you overlay that DRC over a map of the United States, it pretty much covers the entire eastern United States from the Mississippi to the Atlantic Ocean. That's how big it is. So there's 2 things to think about when you think about the size of that country. One is people say, well, isn't it dangerous? Isn't there? We hear bad things about DRC. Well, that's true. There are areas of DRC I wouldn't go to and people don't go to and shouldn't go to. But when you compare that to the size of the eastern United States, it's like saying, well, I hear there's people murdered in Chicago, which happens about daily, and you don't want to go there. The risks are high, but that doesn't mean it's not safe to go to Sparta, Tennessee. So when you compare the size and you realize there are places that you don't want to go and you shouldn't go, there are places that are safe and you can go to. So, and just one other example is Mali, which is central West Africa, the green, odd-shaped Mali. That's a huge country as well. And in the north, when I first went there 5 years ago, I think was my first trip, and the State Department says to U.S. citizens, do not go there. And most people have pulled out, including the missionaries. There's very few there. And it's true, in the north, you do not want to go there. But in the south, where the hospital's located, it was relatively secure at the time. I went 4 years in a row to Mali. This last year, they asked me to come back, and now, sadly, things have gone south no pun intended, in southern Mali, and it's not safe. Even the only missionary doctor and his family that was there at the hospital, they pulled out this year, a few months ago, and have come back to the States. So it can change. But anyway, back to the DRC. So there's safe places. That red that you can't probably read, the little red country to the east of DRC is Uganda. And actually that Ebola, if you've seen the news, it's actually kind of spreading from DRC into Uganda, because right in the top northeast border or area of DRC is where we go to and where it's safe as far as risks go, but that's where the Ebola hit. And it's right across the border from Uganda. Matter of fact, when we go to Uganda, you fly a commercial flight into Entebbe, Uganda, and then you take a missionary flight across the border into the DRC, and that's usually with either MAF, Mission Aviation Fellowship, or Samaritan's Purse missionary planes. That's how you get there. But so now we can't go because of Ebola. But that's where that's located. Oh, and the other point I was going to make is because of the size, then, and the risk in a lot of parts of it, there's very few organizations or relief organizations will go there to provide medical care. There's very few mission hospitals. In the hospitals, any of you that have traveled overseas into the majority world, you really don't want to go to the hospitals. And it's very common. I remember going to Central America and seeing the government hospitals, and they're outside of all the government hospitals, you will find casket businesses and funeral service businesses, because a lot of the people know that's where you go to die. So the healthcare is not really good. So because the healthcare is so poor, there's very few mission hospitals and very few trained doctors in the country. That's why, and it's so large, that's why the clinical needs are so great. And why we keep going back with all these teams, because you go and you can't treat all the patients because there's so many that need it, that they say, when you're coming back, please come back. They appreciate it. But the needs are so great and the opportunities are so great, that's why multiple trips to the DRC, because people wonder why you keep going back there. Well, that's why. The needs are great and the opportunities are great. Let's see. Oh, Gabon. You want to know where Gabon is? Can anybody spot it on the map? Yep, you're going the right direction. It's if you're in a DRC and you go to the coast, that little red country that you can't read the words on, that's Gabon. So Gabon is interesting. It's like, you go into Gabon and you fly a commercial airline into Libreville, the capital, in the northwest corner of Gabon, right on the ocean coast there. And then you drive down 9 hours drive to the hospital that's on the border of Congo in Gabon. And it's the only mission hospital, Christian mission hospital in that country. It's the only one. So it has a significant impact. It does a lot of things besides being the only Christian mission hospital. They have a program that was started there years ago, and they train physicians, doctors, national African surgeons are trained at that hospital. They go back then to other countries and serve. So they have a great program to train the nationals and not be dependent just on short-termers coming over. So they train the nationals. And that's kind of the program that Worldwide Biomed's trying to follow on training the technical. The same thing with biomeds. Train national biomeds so they can take care of their equipment and they don't depend on the few of us that are able to go over to help them. So that's Gabon. That hospital I mentioned in Mali, in south of Mali, Kuchala, that also in that entire country is the only Christian mission hospital in that country. So you see there's kind of a shortage of Christian mission hospitals. Excuse me. I've got to remember where I'm at. Bruce is not here, but those of you a few weeks ago that heard Bruce's presentation on the handing out the Bibles, he made a lot of great points that I appreciated, one of which is, of course, how many people they share with, and not just hand the Bibles out, but they're able to share with, and the impact that has. But it's hard, as he pointed out, when you have hundreds of stories, it's hard to tell you all these stories. And I can think of a few, but I could spend all day. Bruce kind of struggled too, because he wanted to tell all these great stories of what God does by handing out the Bibles and so on. But it's hard to do. But what people kind of like to see is numbers, and they're Jennifer's holding off on the next slide because I'm going to give you an example of numbers that gives you an example of what God's doing. But I don't want you to read all those numbers before I explain it to you. So there's numbers. There's a lot of numbers. But the key point is that and Bruce wanted to point this out too. Every one of those numbers represents a person in a story, and the stories change and they're different. But when you do a blitz of handing out Bibles to hundreds, or you do surgery teams and you're providing all these surgeries, there's a whole lot of stories, and there's a lot of great stories. Too many to tell, so I can't tell you all the stories. But I can give you an idea of how many stories there are. So that we can go to the next slide now. Well, you probably can't read it anyway, so it's just as well. So the point out that I pointed out too in Luke, the thing that's exciting about medical missions, because Dr. Luke throughout his gospel talks about it all the time. Bruce mentioned it too, because he went to a mission, he went to a hospital and passing out the Bibles, and he pointed that out, how overwhelmed he was on the number of people that came. The thing about medical missions, and not to put a plug in for it, but the reason I really personally appreciate the TV series, The Chosen, is because you not only hear parts of it, but you get to see it played out. And I love the way that they took the stories of, like, the woman with the bleeding issue, the leper that had leprosy, blind, whatever it is, all of these people that have these physical things. And you read in the gospel and you read, like, the woman, well, she had an issue of blood for 12 years. She has faith, so she knows if she just touches Jesus, she'll be healed. She touches him, she's healed, and that's the biblical narrative. Now, for those of you who have seen the series, they show in all these cases, like with the leper as well, how awful life is with those physical issues. It's awful. You saw me get emotional with the cleft lip. Because you have to see what their lives are like prior to healing. And it's bad. So now you bring physical healing, and that alone has a big impact on their lives, changes their life. Then you add to it the thing that I like about medical missions, in what Jesus said, go out and heal and proclaim the gospel. It's a combination. It's not one or the other. You don't go just to heal so they're relieved with their physical problems and deformities or birth defects, whatever it is. They're physically healed, which changes their lives, but then also there's the opportunity for them to see, because the mission hospitals, the surgery teams, all of those people are told and understand that it is God that brings the healing. And those who provide, the clinical people that provide the service, are treating. I love my first trip to Africa some 34 years ago. One of the hospitals I visited, which is now about the largest hospital in Kenya, is huge. But I remember going there, and there was a sign still there. It's become a very famous sign, outside of the hospital. It says, "We treat, Jesus heals." And that's made clear that he's the one that does the healing. So they recognize and acknowledge that. And so it's a combination of the healing, but it's then the spiritual healing that takes place and can take place as a result of that. because we didn't have any music, I have a little extra time, so I'm giving you more than I had planned here on the notes. That's free. Now to these statistics. No charge for all that extra stuff. Now for the statistics, and so, like I said, there's a lot of stories, and I just picked one because I don't keep track of all of them, and there's too many stories, and I don't take notes, and I'm not a journal keeper, and so that's terrible on my part. But anyway, we do keep notes, and the statistics that you may or may not be able to read up there is from a cataract trip, the end of last year that I went on, and I know it's cataract, even though in my notes I don't say that, or I just have the country, but I don't remember which trip it was. But I can tell because of the number of surgeries. So now if you're doing orthopedic surgeries, like which was the last trip to Gabon, was the orthopedic team. When you're doing orthopedic surgeries, you're talking, for those of you who unfortunately have had orthopedic surgery, you can be 3 or 4 hours in surgery. So those are long I see that hand. It's a long surgeries and long recovery. So you do a lot less of those. I think on that Gabon trip, I think there was maybe 30 surgeries, around 30 complete surgeries during that time. Then you do cleft lip surgeries. Depending on the type of cleft lip or the severity of it, those average, say, 45 minutes for a surgery. So you can do, of course, more. And I think typically on the cleft lip surgery teams, during the time that they're doing the surgeries, they'll do 200, 250 surgeries during that trip. So that's a lot of surgeries. Well, on this one, if you can read it, they first of all, they screened over 1,000. And this kind of goes back to the story of the fact that if you're providing health care, you don't need to ask people to come. It spreads fast. People hear and they will come. It's like the field of dreams. If you build it, they'll be there. And Jesus didn't, you know that in the Gospels. Jesus didn't call the people to himself. He had a problem with the crowds being too big because the word spread and they came. And so he was overwhelmed because they came because of the physical needs. And so on this particular one, they screened over 1,000 because they knew they couldn't do that many surgeries. So they screened and picked the candidates that are going to work that they can do the surgery on. After they screened those 1,000, they ended up doing 558 surgeries during that trip. And again, back to the spiritual side of it, whether it's a mission hospital or surgery teams, there's always a ministry team that is very intentional. Remember that word, I'm going to come back to it. Very intentional with sharing the gospel, just like as Bruce shared with handing out the Bibles. They just didn't hand them out, they shared with individuals. And so they do that. So every individual, every patient is talked to, and these surgery teams, these ministry teams are either chaplains from the hospital or pastors, local pastors, or evangelists that are brought, whatever, but they put together a ministry team that shares with every one of the patients and their families and so on. So on this particular trip, you'll see that they presented the gospel individually. They also will do devotions to the groups, but they individual presentations to over 1,000 during this trip. And they give out Bibles. To all the patients get a Bible in their language. And there's another side tangent I could get off on that, it's interesting. My Bible at home, it's a big study Bible with cross-references, so it's a thicker one, and it's an ESV version. And when I go to the field, I take my lighter Bible, which is thin, and that's a NASB, New American Standard. And then, of course, we have it here. And then on the shelf, there's more Bibles. And to us, it's like we think nothing of it, and we have multiple ones. And many of these people have never had one their own. Bruce shared this too, so I can't imagine that. Not having one. So needless to say, they're pretty excited when they're given a Bible and have their own. Now, there's some that either because of maybe vision and they can't see, or they're illiterate and they can't read, and so they're given actually audio Bibles. And just one fun story that was fun, the guy that received an audio Bible, and he was so excited, so he took it to work with him, and he played it and listened to the Bible while he was working. But not just him, his co-workers all listen to the Bible every day at work. So there's a lot of stories. The last line up there, if you can't read it, after that, this was about a 2-week or 10-day trip of surgeries. At the end of it, because what we do too is we have an appreciation dinner for the ministry team, and at night have a dinner for them, and then to thank them for what they've done, and then give them an opportunity to share these stories. And because there's so many, they pick a few stories of what God did and in different people's lives, and those are always fun to hear. So, and you're not going to hear any of them, but they, on this particular team, they recorded 454 commitments or decisions, responses to the gospel, after sharing with over 1,000. Those are all different stories, people in different parts. Some may be hearing it for the first time. Some maybe have heard it, never responded, so they were able to respond to the gospel because it was clearly presented. Others, there were some that were believers that had struggling in their faith, and they needed to get back with the Lord and recommitted their lives. So there's a variety of stories, but all that long point with this slide is that the spiritual side of it is amazing what God does, not just the physical healing. That's exciting in and of itself, but then what God's doing in the spiritual lives of people is pretty exciting, pretty amazing. Okay, let's see. So we can go to the next one. Here's the 40-minute message now. No, I do have a few, and I was actually hoping I would run out of time because there's a story that I have to tell that is very convicting to me, and where I've been multiple times weighed in the balance and come up short. And God reminds me of that every once in a while, and I was reminded in Gabon as I was doing my devotions, and I was reading in Psalm 96. And so it's difficult for me to share this. Jeff has heard it before, and he saw the basket case I was. I told him he may have to come up and finish this more for me because he had heard it. But anyway, in Gabon, it was in my personal devotions, and then we would have staff devotions where we would share together. But in my personal devotions, I was reading in Psalm 96, and it was, again, I had my NASB Bible with me at the time, and like most Bibles, it has, if you want to follow along, because I'm going to share some verses, but I'm not going to put them on the screen. I'm going to wing it from here. But if you want to see and try to follow along, and if you're good Bereans, you'll check to see if what I'm saying is true or not. But anyway, Psalm 96, and a lot of the Bibles will have a title to the Psalms, and this one in the NASB was a call to worship the Lord. And in my ESV, it also has the word worship. So a lot of the titles in the Bibles will have a title for this chapter 96 of Psalms is worship, which is true, and it's full of worship. However, the thing that God kept drawing my attention to and talking to me about was the proclamation of the gospel. So if I was to title this psalm, I would title it the proclamation or proclaiming the gospel. And as I went through it and I was meditating on it and going through it, I noticed that it tells you pretty much everything you want to know about evangelism or proclaiming the good news, the who, what, why, when, and where. And so that's kind of what I would like to share, some of my thoughts from Psalm 96. And I'm just going to touch on, I'm not going to read all 13 verses, I'm just going to touch on the verses that I meditated on and God brought to my attention. And the first is verse 2. It says, "Sing to the Lord, bless his name, proclaim the good news of his salvation from day to day." And as I was meditating, thinking on that, by the way, the ESV, if you're looking at all, I don't know what translation you've got. Is it NASB? The ESV says, tell of his salvation. Proclaim the good news, tell of his salvation, sharing your faith, witnessing, evangelism, however we want to refer to it, it's the same. It's proclaiming and telling the good news of his salvation. And that's both the who and the what. It's what we do, is proclaim. And who? You just have to look at the psalm and then even go back to verse 1. It says, sing to the Lord, all the earth, everyone, all of us. So there's not an exception. All of us are to proclaim the good news of his salvation, to tell of his salvation. There's no exception, sorry. That's a convicting one, but that's the way it is, brothers and sisters. It's you and me. That's the who, and the what is to proclaim or tell of his salvation. Then we go to when, and that's from day to day. And it's not like when you make a medical mission trip or a Sunday or when we visit the prison. It's not certain times, it's day to day. Every opportunity we have, we are to tell of his salvation and proclaim the good news. So that's the who and what and the when. And then it's the where. Verse 3, tell of his glory among the nations, his wonderful deeds among all the peoples. And as I meditated on that, of course, the verse probably came to your mind as well. We all know, tell of his glory among the nations. Jesus made it clear that that's everywhere in Acts 1:8. We start in Jerusalem. That's where we are, home. Whether that's our neighborhood, our workplace, wherever it is, our community around us, our home, that's Jerusalem. So we will be his witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea. That's surrounding or outlying communities. And Brett, I think about you that maybe Judea is the prison, going out to the prison, or other places is your Judeas, where you minister and proclaim the good news. So that's Judea. I'm going to skip Samaria, and we're going to jump to the uttermost parts of the earth. We'll get back to Samaria because this is a tough one. If I out of time yet? Shoot, I'm not. The remotest part of the earth, the uttermost parts of the earth, I certainly appreciate the opportunity I've had to go to the many places around the world, and I know that others here still do. Bruce and others in the Brazil trips. Some have made trips in the past. I'd still like to encourage people, be praying, and if God gives that opportunity, it's great to go to the uttermost parts of the earth, to see what he's doing, and to be a part of that, and to share with it where all those people like the DRC and all those countries where they don't get to hear it like we do, and they don't even have Bibles. So we go to the uttermost parts of the earth. Now the tough one, Samaria. Here's where it gets tough. Samaria is not so much a geographical location. I always understood it and like to think of it as Jesus put Samaria in there when he said, go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. He included Samaria because it was a people group. It's people that he understood, and we know, that the Jews didn't care for. They actually hated him, didn't like it. They would avoid him. You know this many stories. Jesus talked a lot about the Samaritans. And when they would travel from the north and go down to Jerusalem, they would literally go around and go the long way around just to avoid Samaria. They didn't care for Samaria. And I like to refer to those people as the undesirables. The people we wouldn't choose to be our friends or hang around with. Those are the undesirables. But you look back up in verse 3, and it says, tell of his glory among the nations, among all the peoples, including the undesirables, the people we don't care for. He calls us to share and proclaim his gospel to those people. And throughout Israel's history, of course, there are stories of where God's called people to do that, and the one that's a tough one for me to share is Jonah, the story of Jonah. Because Jonah, he also didn't care for the Ninevites. The Ninevites were not really popular people. If you read the book of Nahum, the minor prophet Nahum describes how awful the Ninevites were, and they were nasty people. They were bad people. I can't say that he was justified, but it's understandable why Jonah had the attitude towards the Ninevites that he did. Kind of like the Jews of the time of Jesus' time, disliking the Samaritans. They disliked the Ninevites. So Jesus, of course, or God sends them there. In Sunday school, when we hear Jonah, when we think of the fish story. And that's a good story. It's a part of the story, and the fish story is part of it, but that's not the point of the whole story. The point of the story is Jonah's attitude towards the Ninevites. So I didn't realize till I was making notes on this that it's almost 10 years ago, 2017, when the coalition forces were trying to put an end to ISIS in Mosul, Iraq. And ISIS is an acronym for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And so ISIS wanted to make Mosul, Iraq, it's kind of like their capital or their main headquarters of ISIS in Mosul. And so everybody's tired of it, so the coalition forces go together and surrounded them and are trying to do away with ISIS. And of course, if you know anything about ISIS, if you've seen pictures of probably their brutal people, and you've probably seen pictures of them beheading Christians and other people. They're not nice people. They're undesirables. So Samaritan's Purse deployed a emergency field hospital to Mosul to treat the victims of this war, this battle. And it was not the fighters or whatever, primarily. It was for the women and children who were the casualties because ISIS is brutal. And they do, like when you see this in the Middle East now, Islam, they take people and they use them as hostages. And you've heard the stories. The stories are awful of what they do to hostages or hide behind women and children and all the rest. And it's awful. And I was there for several weeks, and after seeing these casualties come in every day, children and women and with blown off legs or whatever, pretty bad, it got to be tiring. But when they were brought in, they would do, and some of you will remember the series MASH, the military movie, or the series MASH, and in MASH what they did when they brought in casualties, they did triage. I think maybe most of you are familiar with it. If you're not, what triage is, when you bring in casualties, you separate them into 3 groups. And they're divided up, and you separate them into the yellow group are those who don't have life-threatening injuries, and you'll be able to take care of them. They're not going to die, but they need care, but not immediately. And then the other group is the red group, those who are critically injured, and if you don't take care of them now, they're going to die. So they have to be treated right away, surgery, whatever. So you treat those quickly, and those are the red group. And the third group is black, coded black, and that's the ones that aren't going to make it no matter what you do. They're not going to survive. And so with the patients that were coded black, you just didn't put them in a corner somewhere and leave them. Those went to another tent, but they weren't left alone, and so whatever staff was available, usually 2 staff, would sit with those patients until they passed. And depending on their condition or whatever, and depending on who was sitting with the patients, most of, prayed for the patients. Some, if there was any consciousness at all, or they thought there might be, they would share. And some would sing or play music for them and whatever. And so the day came when I was available to and asked to go in to sit with a patient that was coded black. And it turned out to be a young guy that was probably early 20s, and he was an ISIS fighter. And so I went in with this, actually it was a chaplain and I went in. He was much more gracious, and he stayed close to the guy's head and would pray and would share in right up to his ear. And I just sat there kind of wrestling with the Lord and saying, I'm having a hard time. Feeling bad for this guy. And I remember the prayers. There wasn't certainly a confession of the fact that it was sin, but I struggled with, I'm just having a hard time feeling bad for this guy and praying for this guy. And I don't know how long that time went on. Doesn't matter. it was a period of time, and then I finally quit trying to reason with the Lord and paused. Then he spoke. And it was very simple and short, just a few words, and it was a question. In the ESV, it's only 5 words. In the NASB, I think it's 8 words long. It's a question. It's the same question that God asked Jonah at the very end of the book of Jonah. Verse 11 of chapter 4. ESV, he says, ask Jonah, should not I have pity on Nineveh? Should not I pity Nineveh? NASB said, should I not have compassion on Nineveh? As I shared with our D group when I shared this, as we were studying Jonah, I began to understand why the book of Jonah ends so abruptly. It ends with that question. There's no more discussion. Jonah doesn't say anymore, and that's how it ended in that tent. I knew, and you know the answer to the question. Jonah knew it. He said earlier in chapter 4, he acknowledged, he says, I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in mercy. But I had nothing to say because I was lacking, guilty. I didn't have that compassion. And there was nothing more I could say except for, of course, overcoming days and times to confess and ask for that heart that God has. So, when we look at verse 3 of Psalm 96, tell of his glory among the nations, his wonderful deeds among all peoples. That includes the Samaritans, the Ninevites, ISIS, any of the undesirables that are in our life that we don't really care for. And so that was a struggle. And I think I'm just enough time to go to the last slide for application. We'll end with the bridge to life. So what are we going to do about this? These are the things I thought about as that God brought to mind as applying this sharing of the gospel. One is, the first one is when, deals with when. And that is, when do we share? We need to look for opportunities. So we need to ask God to make those opportunities clear for us. We need to be aware and look for those opportunities day by day. 1 Peter 3:15 is a verse that God brought to mind. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. So we need to be prepared to give that answer anytime someone asks us. So we need to look for those opportunities. Second bridge to life I thought of, or application, was that word that I mentioned earlier is being intentional. You don't just kind of wait for it to maybe come by, because it never will, especially with the undesirables. We are not going to look for those opportunities. And I'm getting my things mixed up. But we need to be intentional in the conversations and what we say. So we need to be intentional in what we're saying, and that we need to move conversations from just chat to spiritual things and to opportunities to share the gospel. So we need to be intentional doing that. One of the things that I liked, and I don't know how many of you attended either before or this last year, was when Mike Jackson came and shared that. He did a really good job teaching how to be intentional in your conversations and lead spiritual conversations to the presentation of the gospel. So we need to do that. And the verse that came to mind there was Colossians 1:28. Him we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Christ. So we need to be intentional in moving our conversations to that so we can do that. And the last one is that difficult one with Jonah, and having a compassion to do that with those that we don't care for. If we don't, I know, I forgot a verse. Let me go back to Psalm 96. Is the why. Sorry, I missed that. I missed the why in Psalm 96. The why is in Psalm 96, verse 10 and 13. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Indeed, the world is firmly established. He will judge the peoples fairly. For he is, verse 13, he is coming to judge the earth, and he will judge the world in righteousness. Judgment is coming. And if we don't have that compassion for that Ninevite or the ISIS guy, and don't care that they're going to hell, or our neighbors that may not know the Lord and going in, if we don't have that compassion and are not concerned that these people are going to go to hell if we don't share with them, we're not going to be intentional and we're not going to share. So it starts, and Mike Jackson, I think, pointed this out. If you don't have that compassion that Jesus does for the lost, you're not going to share. You won't be intentional and you won't look for those opportunities. So what I need to do, of course, God reminded me when I was in Gabon that I'm still not there with that having a heart for the lost and the undesirables in my life enough that I would share with them and be intentional in that. I'm out of time, but there's some applications that God brought to my mind. I didn't give you any time for questions, but I could always chat later if you have any questions about any of this stuff. So anyway, hopefully you're encouraged that we apply Psalm 96. We proclaim the good news to those who are lost. Do it intentionally, even to those we don't really care to share with. So let's pray and close. Father, again, we're thankful for your word, and even though it hurts, and sometimes, so often I come up short, thank you for reminding me and loving me and still giving me the opportunity to proclaim the good news and to share with others. May that be the case with all of us. May all of us grow in our love for you in such a way that our love for the world is the same as yours, and that we love and have compassion on them, and that we'll be faithful in sharing your love with them and the good news with them. So help us do that, and we thank you again for the time we've had together. We praise you for it all.